Welcome to the Clean Library Podcast, where content meets conscience. We believe there are millions of you readers out there desperately searching for a better way to find clean content. Each episode, we will introduce you to a new author of clean books, giving you, your family, and your friends clean options.
Hello, my name is Marcus Williams, and I'm here with co-host Brock Morris, and today we have special guest Kent Merrell. Following his service as a missionary in Bolivia, South America, he married, started a family, and received his BA from Brigham Young University. In 1980, he graduated and opened an advertising agency until he could find a real job. Now, 44 years later, he jokes he never did find a job and remains unemployable. He lives in Salt Lake City with his wife of 45 years. Together, they enjoy their 5 children and soon-to-be 22 grandchildren. Welcome, Kent. Thank you so much for being on the show with us today.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Absolutely. So we're going to jump into our two truths and a lie, and I'll introduce you. This is our scorekeeper, Steve. Being a Salt Lake native, you may recognize him. He was the broadcaster for the Salt Lake Bees, or Buzz, over the years. So he's keeping score for our two truths and a lie for us. So far, Brock is still in the lead, and we're in a long baseball game where we keep going inning after inning, and the score doesn't change. So maybe today we'll get it to change. All right, so let's go over your two truths and a lie. Number 1. I was arrested by the Chinese military and held in confinement as they levied charges against me in Chinese. I don't speak Chinese, and so there was a standoff. Number 2. While skydiving over the Alps in Interlaken, Switzerland during a training drop, my parachute caught on the release and tore. My fall was more rapid than expected, and my left ankle shattered upon impact. And number 3. A former girlfriend invited me to her wedding reception. My date for the evening was a girl I had recently began dating. The new bride insisted her new husband step aside so the photographer could get a picture of his bride and me together. I eventually married my date, but the former girlfriend eventually divorced her husband. Darn. All right. Those are 3 good ones. We're going to have to work.
I don't know how to weave all those in, but we'll figure it out.
So, Kent, as an advertising professional, I definitely want to talk about that in relation to your books. But first of all, tell us about your books and how you got into writing.
Well, as I have served clients all over the place over the years, I ended up traveling. Let me back up. My first real endeavor in advertising after a few years was a direct mail piece that I did for a client in northern Utah. And the way I put it together was really creative and fun and generated a 28% response rate, which was fantastic. And as I was telling the vendor who printed it for me how it worked, he said, "Oh, you need to enter that into the Echo Awards." Now, I'd never heard of the Echo Awards. I'd never heard of any direct marketing business. I just thought I had invented direct mail. I mean, just a guy in northern Utah. And so I entered. It was only $35 entry fee. So I entered this competition, and I got an invitation from somebody back in New York to attend this award ceremony in Montreal, Canada. And so I mustered enough to get back there. I was, poor and broke and a young kid that had his own ad agency. And I won the Gold Echo Award for the best direct mail piece internationally for the whole year.
Wow.
So I'm nobody, but I'd always dreamed of being an advertising guy on Madison Avenue, New York, being, in the big game. And a guy that was there who was Bob Stone, who was one of the pioneers in direct marketing. He was at the table, and I asked him, I said, "Bob, how do I get a real job and come back here and work in New York?" Madison Avenue guy. And he said, "Don't. We don't want you. We don't want you here. We don't want you competing with us back here. And you don't want to raise a family in New York. So you're good enough. The business will come to you." So the business did come to me. And over the years, I've served some fantastic clients all over the place. And that first Echo Award that I won, and it's given based on how much money you made the client. So it's results based, 100% results based.
Yeah.
And since then, I've won 27 of them and been invited to speak and travel and get around. So it's been really wonderful. Well, as I travel, I'm sitting on an airplane or in a hotel. It's like, what am I going to do? I'm not going to waste my time on videos or something. So I began writing more than just advertising. So yeah, my career is writing advertising. That's what I've been doing. But and I wrote a screenplay that I thought was wonderful. Well, nobody would ever produce it, of course. So I wrote another one, just a creative outlet.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, about 10 years ago, I thought, well, nobody's going to ever produce one of my movies, even though I thought they were cool. They probably were lousy. But I thought, I'm going to write a business book because I thought I knew a lot about business. Well, I had employed hundreds of people over the years and had a reasonably successful ad agency in Utah. And so I started writing this business book, and as it came together, it was pretty dull and pretty boring. And so I thought, I got to add some stuff. And so I had some people, experiencing some of these. It was about leadership and management of people.
Yeah.
And so I threw in some hard to manage people, which were pirates. And then a friend of mine read this manuscript and said, Kent, get rid of the business stuff and just write fiction. That's what's going to work. And so then, and that was 8 years later, after I had done that, I published my first book, which was The Blade of Safavid, is how it's pronounced in Persian.
Mm-hmm.
And it just happened. I would get up in the morning. I write from 5 to 7 in the morning, give or take the time, to visit with my wife. And, then I'm interrupted sometimes. But it took me 8 years to write the book. It's only 582 pages, so it's plenty big enough for 8 years. But it was fun. And I loved writing and the fiction, and the research that it took was immense. So I spent a lot of time researching and learning, and that was fascinating. And having traveled and been around with businesses and clients and speaking, I got to visit some interesting places. And so it was fun to insert, my feelings and what that felt like and what it was like. In the book, there's one scene that I had to throw in about the Taj Mahal because I had a client that sent me on a photo shoot into India. And so just those kinds of things added to it. And I fell in love with historical fiction.
Yeah. That's awesome. So have you put out more books since then?
My next book, my first book was a religious book about the 12 days of Christmas. That was my very first book 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But the historical fiction is where my love is. And so I then spent the next year writing another historical fiction. I got it done in about a year. And it was, I thought, a pretty good story. It was more about the conquest of the Inca Empire by Francisco Pizarro. I hadn't seen any really good historical fictions on that. And I had spent some time down in the Andes. I thought it'd be a great story. The editor, when I gave it to the editor to go through, she came back and said, Kent, this is too big of a story. This is not one book. You've got to break this story into 3.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no idea how to do that. And so she gave me some outlines on what to do and how to do that. And so I went back and spent the next year and a half, which is the end of that year and a half is right now, writing actually book 1 of a 4-book series. And that one's called The Conquest of Liberty. That book is about it's the march towards liberty that started in the 1500s. And actually what it took from the feudal system, the monarchy, tyranny, to the freedoms that we enjoy today. And so I went back and wrote book 1 of that 4-book series. So I have book 2 kind of in the bag. I've written book 1. It came back from the editor about a month ago, and my wife and I are now proofreading it one more time.
Yeah.
And the end of the week, it goes to production, where they're going to start formatting and laying out. I'm hoping we can launch that one before summer's over.
Awesome. So
that's one book.
Are you going through a traditional publisher, or are you indie publishing those?
indie publishing.
Mm-hmm.
In all my studies, I realized that the traditional is I'm going to have to find an agent. I'm going to have to get the publisher, and I'm going to have to get paid hardly much. And I'm not patient enough for all of that.
Uh-huh.
And the world today is so much different. And in advertising, I know about printing. I know about publishing. I figured that was not going to be difficult at all.
Yeah.
The problem I had on the first book was I never did market it because I'm busy making money, taking care of clients. And I didn't take the chance to really push it, which is different this time around. This time I've hired a team to help me to really launch.
So is it like the advice that a lawyer should never be his own lawyer, and is it an advertiser should never be his own advertiser?
Somewhat. Somewhat. The team actually is going to, they're going to manage all the social media. They're going to manage the how to get Amazons and how to get the Ingram Sparks and how to get those kind of things to generate more visibility.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there we'll take over. The biggest problem was that I've had the hurdle was my website that I thought was wonderful, of course, was just like my first book. It was way too much business, way too much advertising, way too much marketing. And the launch team said, you got to dump all that. Nobody cares that you can write a junk mail piece. Nobody cares that you can get response rates. All they care is, can you write a great, thrilling adventure that is fun to read? So that launches next week, the new website that I think is pretty cool. And then we're off and running. And then we will relaunch the first book.
Okay. So with that first, how did you go from all these kind of stories relating to your business and to tying them all together into a cohesive book?
So the first book, it was about motivating employees and motivating families and people based on some principles that I'd learned. And so I had based the book, the first book, it was called Someday Isle, ISLE. So it was going to be some people stranded on an island, and why couldn't they get off? Well, it was because of fear, because of laziness, all the things that stop people from progressing.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to address all those things, and that's why it was a cool, someday ISLE. Someday I'll get around to doing that.
Yeah.
Sort of that. And so the story started to develop around some people stranded on an island. That's why pirates showed up, and those kind of things. And so that story, as I built the story and dropped out the business side of it, I kept 2 or 3 of the principles pretty strong in there
mm-hmm.
in the book. I think they're strong. They're maybe too subtle for people. The actual principle is you got to have faith. And so it's a faith-based adventure.
Gotcha.
And the faith is, I have to have, and this is the business principle too, I have to have faith that I can do what it takes to get paid or to receive the reward that I want. If I don't think I can do it, I'm not going to waste my time. Then I have to have faith in whoever's going to deliver the reward. If I don't believe the boss is going to pay me, if I don't believe God's going to reward me, if I don't believe my neighbor is going to do something or the government's going to provide, then I don't have the motivation to do it.
Yeah.
And then the third element of faith, I call it, I have to believe and I have to have faith that the reward that I get is actually worth the work. So those 3 elements, it's really 3, I call them 3 pillars of faith. It's safe and it's the same in religion. I have to believe that God will reward me, that the reward's worth it, and that I can do it.
Yeah.
How many do we quit? My children, they have to believe Dad will deliver, that whatever I've promised is worth it, and that they can actually do it. If I say, hey, if you build the garage, I will give you a car. Well, they don't believe they can build a garage. But they might know that I'd give them a car. But, those kind of things. So,
right.
that was several of those principles were carried through the book with some legends and some people talking. And so some of the business stuff stayed in there, but in a way that it was kind of fun with the adventure.
Cool. And I love your 3 pillars of faith there, that and I mean, we could get into a deep discussion on faith too, but I love that. And I can think of so many examples of people who feel like they're spinning their wheels because one of those pillars is not there, is absent. And so I really liked how you put all those together and how you explained it. It made a lot of sense. So in your writing, at some point, you made a decision to keep your stories or books clean, and maybe that was a conscious decision. Maybe that just was natural to you. But how did that work for you keeping the stories clean?
But one of my, I'll call it a pet peeve, is that you can have a really good movie or a really good book, a really good story, and then you clutter it with inappropriate language or scenes or violence or whatever it happens to be edgier, to be, more modern or credible. I don't buy that at all. Mm-hmm. I think that's it's lazy from the writer or the producer or the filmmaker's standpoint, because this is my feelings. If you go to a movie or read a book for the edgy, the death, the violence, the blood, the sex, the language, you're not my audience. I don't think people go for that. I think we've been taught to accept it and to deal with it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, there's plenty of dirty movies. There's plenty of violent movies and books. And then, go to those. Those don't make sense, because I want my material, my creative energy, which I think I've been blessed with, I want it to teach something good, not preach it, but present it. And so even though my subject matter could easily get pretty violent and these were rough times.
Right.
The first book, the Blade of Safavid, is the story of the pirates who captured the Mughal emperor's treasure ship in 1694. And that it was barbaric. It was as evil as men become.
Yeah.
The raping, pillaging, looting, destruction, murder. But I thought, okay, how do I handle that so they know that these guys were bad guys, but I don't have to dwell on all that. And so I cover the rough times there. The next book, of course, takes place in the 1500s. And so these are rough times and rough people back then, but I don't have to dwell on the nitty gritty. So my own philosophy is people will read it and enjoy the story and learn from the story and be inspired by history, but they don't need the schmut. It's completely unnecessary. And if I threw it in, it would mean I'm lazy and couldn't creatively paint a picture of evil without inviting my readers into the evil.
Yeah. Just the other day, my daughter was looking at a movie and she said, well, why is this one rated R? And I'm like, I don't know. And her comment was, looking at the story, she's like, it doesn't make sense. It sounds like they're just doing it to do it. It gets R just because they added stuff to it. I don't understand why it's in there. And your guess is as good as mine. I have no idea. And I think that reminded me of what as you were talking, that I think sometimes you're right, that we're conditioned that it's supposed to be there or it needs to be there. And so sometimes writers add it not because they feel like it adds to the story or that it's important, just because they feel like they're supposed to.
Yeah, I think they do.
And you hit on something at the end of what you were saying too, Kent, when you said that in the way that you describe, your ability to describe a scene without using that it comes naturally. Is that, I think you said something like it comes naturally. Do you find that that's easy or challenging for you to not, or to avoid more graphic information? Or is it actually more effective for you not to use sort of graphic content?
I think it demands more creativity from me with that challenge. An example in my current book that I'm writing right now, The Conquest of Liberty, they're the actual Spanish conquistadors that came to the Americas. The majority of them were incredibly brutal to the natives, incredibly brutal. There's a book written by Bartolomé de las Casas, who was a conquistador that turned into a champion of the natives. And he became a Dominican friar and really fought for the natives. And he wrote a book that presents the conquistadors as they're not even human. I could bring it into current events that we've seen in the last year, and it's that and worse. And so as I face that, my wife and I, as we're reading, the one thing that people ask me all the time is, well, is that historical or is that fictional? Is that guy historical or is that fictional? And I'll talk about that a little later if you ask the question about that. But as we're proofreading this together, she goes, "Now, what's that? Is that true?" And I said, "Honey, that is the tip of the iceberg." She goes, "Really?" And then I described the scene that I read from Bartolomé de las Casas' book. She goes, "Oh my." And it was absolute terrible torture so that these natives would show the conquistadors where their gold mines are.
Mm-hmm.
And the conquistadors didn't care if 1 million people died savagely as long as they got gold. So to tell that in the stories is a little bit challenging, but when it's done, I read and I think, am I too nice to the conquistadors, or would the book become unbearable because it's just a tell-all of wicked?
Right.
And so I have to hang the story on good people, and most of the good people are fictional.
Well, and sometimes we like to believe, or I don't know what the right word for it is, that somehow, we've evolved as a species and we're so much better now that, but I think evil exists today like it did then, and good exists today like it did then. Like there were people searching for the virtuous back then, just like there are now, and vice versa. There were people that were pursuing and doing evil then and now, and human beings haven't changed that much, in my opinion. I don't know. What do you think?
No, I find the people then and the people now we haven't. Some of the laws protect us, and some of them don't. And back then they didn't have near the laws. The challenge that they had, they actually did not have liberty. They didn't have freedom. When William Tyndale translated the Bible so that into English so people could read it, that changed all sorts of things. As soon as people are able to think and have liberty, everything changes. And so in today's world, where that liberty is being attacked, it's harder because too many of us want good, and not just religion, just good. Mm-hmm. And so back then there were lots of them that wanted, they just didn't believe they could get it. And they didn't have the power to do it either. The monarchs and the feudal systems and those kind of things actually did hold people back.
Yeah, or just access to information and the ability to read and think for themselves and make choices for themselves. Yeah, that's a great point. And I think it's important, even when you're, like you said, when you're telling a story that is surrounding such horrible things or evil things, to have characters that are good or wanting to be good or trying to be good, or there needs to be hope, Yeah.
In fact, it's interesting to find you probably heard of Vasco Núñez de Balboa, mm-hmm. who, discovered the southern sea, he called it, which was the Pacific Ocean. Even he was a little bit, he had to be brutal when he conquered some of the tribes, but he was a genius. Most of his conquering was negotiation and helping the people and working together. then you compare him to Cortez, and you compare it to some of the other conquerors. There were really, really good men that tried, but they were in a tough place. And I haven't, this is a thing I have not been able to figure out how to say. And that is, it was good for Western civilization, let's say Europe, to conquer the New World so that we eventually could have liberty, because they never would have had it in Europe had we not started it here, even though millions of people died, both of illness and of mistreatment. And I don't know how to say that yet. I'm still working on how I can reconcile all the evil that took place, but we didn't bring the evil with us. We just brought ours and joined it with theirs.
Yeah.
The natives were a brutal people as well. There were good ones there too. I think the little Inca family that's, on Easter, right on the edge of the Amazon, in the Andes Mountains, and this little, I call him a campesino, little man with his wife and his 4 children and his llamas and his little farm, and he's happy and everything's good. And then all he wants to do is raise his family and have his kids marry some of the kids from the other village and just be happy. Those people are all over the world. They're today. And yet you get tyrannical people that think they need to own them and take over and control. And that's a challenge that I think God is going to have. I think he's had it ever since.
Yeah. From the beginning.
Yeah.
And I think, like, you're hitting the nail on the head, that we can't understand God's plan. It's hard for us to see the big picture like God can. Yet it's important for us as individuals to choose good, to take care of our families, to have that, take care of what we can and manage what we can in the best way that we possibly can, and based on what we believe in, the knowledge that we have at the time. Yeah. And it's very easy to judge an entire people or entire group of people without taking into consideration the individual mothers and fathers and children and their struggles and their desires and faith and hope and all of that.
Yeah. That is a big challenge.
Yeah.
And it's important. I think something you alluded to, at least that struck me while you were speaking, is, it's important to have this taking up of this banner to tell stories that represent real things and life that isn't always clean and is oftentimes graphic and messy and sad, but to present them and write them in a way, whether in fiction or nonfiction, that allows people to learn, to think about and ponder the questions that we've just been talking about, without being exposed to maybe the harshness that was truly the reality, and not doing a disservice to both. And I thought you said in a great way, are you representing some of these evil men enough, right? That there's a sense of really what they did, and you represent them accurately, because certainly their victims deserve them to be represented accurately, right? Mm-hmm. But also to do it in a way that allows people to consume that and learn from it without further traumatizing or damaging, right? And that is a tough balance to have, and definitely, and something I've been fascinated as we continue to have authors on here, of taking up that banner, finding a way to share those messages and staying true to them as much as possible without crossing sort of a line that wouldn't allow, that some people just wouldn't read, and certainly kids wouldn't have access to, in some ways. So it's a tough balance, but one I'm grateful there are so many people willing to lean into and have the talent to share. So,
yeah, one of the things that I'm going to back up just a little bit to where my wife and others will say, is that true, or was that fictional, or was that historical?
Yeah.
In all of my research, I fell in love with the historical characters, good or bad, that I've never heard of. No one's ever heard of, unless you're a history professor that studies it. You never heard of these guys. You heard of Vasco Núñez de Balboa.
Right.
You've heard Pizarro. You've heard of Cortez and Ponce de Leon and, De Soto, a handful of those guys.
Right.
Those are the ones I remember hearing about. But you don't know about that Bartolome de las Casas, that Dominican friar. You don't hear about this person and that person. And so when I find them in part of the story, I take their name, I keep them, and I throw them right in the story. And it might be on one page, and then they're gone. And I fall in love with that on the page one. So you've got all these pages right here of the book. And page one, I'm just going to take the chance, because on page one, it's the very first line. And I don't know, if a real good author who has sold 1 billion copies instead of, the thousands or few that us independent guys do. This is a journal entry from a surgeon that's on this pirate ship. Mm-hmm. He's writing and saying, he says, "Flag Captain John Strong died on board. This is not good for me. We're still in port." Okay, that's the last. He never shows up again in the whole book. But you know what? John Strong was a fascinating mariner and captain. But, that's taken from the history. He was the captain of this ship that ended up suffering a mutiny and capturing the Mughal Emperor's treasure ship. So what about John Strong? Why is he even important? Just because I thought he was fascinating.
Yeah.
And so I made a video just about his life. And it's basically, here's a guy, he's a throwaway character, but I enjoy the throwaway characters. And there's a lot of them.
That's cool. And do you find yourself sometimes just getting so fascinated with the research that the writing falls to the wayside a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah. I'll find things. My wife she loves history. We will be watching a movie, historical or whatever, and she wants to know about it. So she's got her Chromebook. She watches movies with her Chromebook. And she looks up actors, she looks up history, she looks up those kind of things. And as we're reading this together, she's doing the same. Now, is this one true? Yes. And she looks it up anyway. Oh, that is fascinating. So historians, and I really am trying to be accurate with the history. And though there are historic and fiction writers who say you can't take liberties with real people. You've got to be true to them. But we don't know what Vasco Núñez de Balboa said. We don't know what King Ferdinand said when he was interviewing the Cardinal Cisneros. And so I throw that in there. And it's 500 years ago, so who's going to fight me over it? Anyway, but it's like, what would he have said based on what I do know about them?
Right.
And so that part of the creative process is very satisfying to me, is to add some life into a lot of these historical characters.
And they become much more relatable when you've added a personality and life to them. I think we can learn from them and be more inspired by them when they're real and when they feel human, and, rather than just a encyclopedia entry or a Wikipedia entry with just facts. So, and you're clearly writing a fiction book, so it's not like you're writing a nonfiction and then and I've read those before where they claim they're nonfiction, yet there's a lot of dialogue, and I'm reading it going, I thought this was supposed to be nonfiction, and clearly you're making up this dialogue. But in a fiction book, I think it's great. I've never had a problem with that. I love that, in fact. But it's a great exercise also as an author, I think, to try to put yourself in their shoes and get in their head, and think what would they say, or how would they react to this situation based on what I know and based on what's available. I think that's a lot of fun.
It is.
My current series has the Swamp Fox from the Revolutionary War in it, and so I've gone down a bit of a rabbit hole reading books about him, because I was trying to think, well, I want a character from that day and age, but I don't want to just use Washington or someone recognizable, but not quite as. And so I remembered the old TV show, Disney show from when I was a kid. I'm like, I want to research him. And I've just fascinating. And now that challenge is, how do I write him in a way that feels true to him, but is also entertaining?
That's right.
So that's cool. So as an author, but also an advertising professional, what advice would you have for other authors who are trying to figure out how to market their books?
Well, as soon as you sign up for, some blog where you're following a newsletter or something of the folks that are telling independent authors how to do their stuff, all of a sudden on your social media, you're approached by 1 million people. Everybody's selling advice and tips and how to sell your book and how to get, 1,000 readers and how to get followers and everything else. So as I've read a bunch of those and then researched a few on my own, so it's not all hype, the one piece of advice that I like the most was from Brandon Sanderson. He, of course, has sold a few million books. Mm-hmm. And in one of his presentations down at Brigham Young University, he said the best marketing of all the marketing you can do to market your first book is your next book. And so I took that to heart. Once my first book was published, I dove right into my second book, which is good and bad. But I was still nobody. Yeah, I got a ton of Facebook friends and I've got a bunch of followers on stuff, but I haven't built, it's all been business related.
Yeah.
My personal life, yes, and business, not author related. And so I have then spent time trying to build the author side without being insufferable to the few friends who actually read my Instagram, my Facebook. And so from that side of it, the advice that I would give is write a really good book to start with, and then write another really good one. So I'm hoping to take my own advice. I feel that my second book is equal to the first book. It's going to be shorter. Mm-hmm. My complaint with this first book was, it's 166,000 words, which is a book. Now, Stephen King, his are 800,000. Ken Follett's are 1,000 words. A million words and 800,000 words. Those are big books.
Yeah.
And so mine's a little bit big. I did have a publisher look at it, the manuscript, and says, "You're a first-time author. You can't do a book that big." And so that's when it was 110,000 words. And so I made it to 160,000. So this next one is only 100,000. So it's a lot smaller book, but it's going to be 3 or 4 of them. So my advice, getting back to the question you had, advice is do all those things to have good friends and good people. Learn about Facebook and Amazon advertising. Amazon is still 80% of the market.
Right.
We're told, for book sales. And don't be obnoxious to your friends and then struggle. My personal launch for this next book is going to be heavy into Amazon advertising. I'm going to support it with a lot of Facebook ads. We do advertising for a lot of our clients now. We've been in direct mail forever. Mm-hmm. I have mailed 400 to 500 million pieces in my 40-year career. So I can do direct mail. Yeah. I'm actually going to try direct mail.
Okay.
In launch. I figured out a way to target some specific historical fiction audiences. I'm going to support that with Facebook, and then the launch team is going to manage all my the Amazon marketing. And so those things are going to be where I launch, and then see if I can, build some audience. My personal goal, of course, I want to be a Ken Follett, where
Sure,
I can write.
yeah.
I can write, 1,000,000 words and people will buy the book. But if I can generate sales consistently over the next 5 books, 10 books, and I have more book ideas than I'll ever have time to write them.
Yeah.
So where do you come up with ideas? No, they just happen. I have way too many. But if I can do that, publish a book a year, 1.5, because I can write pretty fast once the story's in my head, then I think I can generate $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a month, which with all my reading is like, that's reasonable.
Yeah.
That's not a superstar. That's just a good writer. That's where I'd like to be. And if it goes bigger than that, then I'll buy my wife a new garage.
Or you'll have your kids build the garage and you'll buy them a car.
Exactly right.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that would be great to get to that point. And that's going back to your pillars of faith of believing you can do it, believing in the result, and, and doing the work to make it happen. For sure.
Now, have you either considered or already done an audiobook version for your books?
Oh, actually, I love audiobooks. On the first book, Blade of Safavid, this one, of course, I'm going to promote it. It is, as soon as I got the manuscript done, I started hunting for somebody to read it for me. And I auditioned, I think, 5 or 6 narrators. And I found Alan Turton, who is in England. He's a professional. He's done a bunch of books, but he just had the greatest accent. And of course, a lot of it takes place. Most of my characters are English in the book. And so I wanted that English accent, but somebody who could do some Scottish, and I didn't need them to be perfect at it, but to where you would tell that this is a woman and this is,
right,
Scott, and this is whatever. And so I hired him to do it. And one of my greatest reviews that I have, which I publish, is his, when he said, "This was a joy to read this book. It's a joy to narrate a well-written book, because they're not all well written, And then he went through how much he enjoyed going through it the second and third time. So, and with his, I just received a couple weeks ago an award, a silver IPPY award for the audiobook.
Great.
And now,
congratulations.
I've won lots of awards, and I don't want to disparage awards, but very few of them gave me a lot of money. It made me look like I was famous and fancy, because I was on the national and international stage. And when you're invited to go speak in Portugal at a creative conference, and Budapest at a creative marketing convention, international, that's all cool and gratifying and fun and stuff. But still, somebody said years ago that I'm toning this back because this is a clean podcast, but it's, what? Awards, they're just like hemorrhoids. With enough time, everybody's going to get one. So I've laughed at that, and I look at, I've got some Addy awards, I've got some, various awards, and I think they're not worth anything. They're some trophies. I used to have a bunch of them on the walls, shelves I built shelves to hold all the trophies and the awards and the everything.
Yeah.
But you know where they are now? They're in a box in my garage collecting dust. And I look at my wife, my sweet wife, and I don't know if you can see it over this thing. That's a 10-year-old picture of my 10 grandkids. The little one over here is my 20 grandkids. So my claim to fame in the world is in a box in a garage. Her claim to fame are wonderful lives of people. And so I put that in perspective as the award's fun. And it's, as soon as I get the actual information, I'm going to send it to Alan, over there, and say, you took second place worldwide in the audible category. And his voice was so good. The story's good, yes, but he did it such a beautiful job narrating it with the other thing that I loved about this, I should never say this, but being a self-published guy, even though I had editors go through the book, by the time it got built and was printed, that Alan actually had a physical book in his hand that he read before he read the manuscript.
Right.
He says, it looks like you've got 2 chapter 95s. Is that on purpose? No. He said, so I recorded it as chapter 96, and now you've got an extra, it was kind of funny how I went through the stuff with him, and he corrected little teeny typos. So that's the other advice I would give. You need more than one editor.
Yeah.
This book's going to go through, the new one's going to go through 4, plus me and my before it's done. Because you get somebody that says, yeah, it's a great book. You had 4 typos. It's like, how did that happen?
I know. And no matter how many times you go through it, you're going to find something. I believe that sometimes they like create themselves after you're done just to bug you, because it's true. But I guess my one comfort in that is that even traditionally published books have gone through the professional process. I find errors still. So perfection is difficult. Well, this has been a lot of fun, and we're running out of time, but this has been fascinating. Really appreciated your time. We want to go back through your 2 truths and a lie and see if we can figure out which one is the lie. So I'm going to remind everybody. Number 1, I was arrested by the Chinese military and held in confinement as they levied charges against me in Chinese. I don't speak Chinese, so there was a standoff. Number 2, while skydiving over the Alps into Interlaken, Switzerland during a training drop, my parachute caught on the release and tore. My fall was more rapid than expected, and my left ankle shattered upon impact. And number 3, a former girlfriend invited me to her wedding reception. My date for the evening was a girl I had recently began dating. The new bride insisted her new husband step aside so the photographer could get a picture of his bride and me together. I eventually married my date, and the former girlfriend eventually divorced her husband. All right, Brock, what do you think?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, as we've talked and you've shared how much travel you've done internationally, it makes it easy to assume that the first 2 could potentially be true. But I am going to say that number 2 is the lie. We didn't touch on parachuting much, and a training drop made me sound like it was maybe some active duty type thing, but I really don't know. But I'm going to say that's the lie. I think 1 and 3 are the truths. So.
Okay, so that was actually the one I was going to pick as well. So I'm just going to stick with it. The number 2 is the lie.
So do you want me to show you the scar on the ankle?
So clearly we're wrong.
No. I can't, because you're correct.
Oh,
okay. All right. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so arrested by the Chinese military, though. That's true, huh?
Yeah, I was passing from Hong Kong into China, and it was before the Chinese took control of Hong Kong. And there was a big sign on one of the doors where you go through customs and immigration.
Yeah.
And it was a countdown clock of when Hong Kong became Chinese. And I took a picture.
I was going to say, you took a picture, didn't you?
And I was surrounded by Chinese guys in their green uniforms and their rifles. And they hauled me right in and locked me up. And they argued, it was all Chinese, I had no idea. They wanted my camera. That was what they wanted. Mm-hmm. Well, I didn't want to give up my camera. That was my life back in those days. And we argued. And I would say no. They kept pointing to it and trying to take it, and I wouldn't let them have it. And I was stupid. I'm glad I didn't. And finally, after all of that, they brought a guy down who was their superior, and he had just a T-shirt on with his regular, Chinese. So he was not dressed for work.
Yeah.
He came down and asked me what I was going to do with the picture. And I said, I'm just a tourist. I thought it would be cool because I enjoyed here. And he released me. He said, get out of here. He was annoyed that they annoyed him.
Worked in your favor.
Yeah. As soon as you started that story, because I've been through that customs checkpoint, I was like, you took a picture, didn't you? Wow. Well, Kent, thank you so much for being with us today. It's been a lot of fun. I've learned a lot, and it's just been a great conversation. So we really appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Brock. I appreciate it the time.
Yeah. And for everyone out there listening or watching, please subscribe, follow, share with your friends, share online. That's the biggest thing that you can do to help the podcast grow and to help get the word out about clean authors and clean books and content that you would feel comfortable and safe reading. So we appreciate all of your help doing that, and we appreciate you watching or listening, and we will catch you next time on the Clean Library Podcast.